Hey everyone, in this tutorial I'm making the bodice dress by Collars Etc. I've actually made this dress before on our main channel way back in the springtime, and in that tutorial I had the collar on this dress. In this tutorial I'm not going to have the collar, but I am going to use a new little embellishment that Farmhouse has called some lace tape. This stuff is pretty cool and I was really excited to get some and play with it. So I'm starting this project off like any others by ironing it, and I'm actually ironing the hem over once and then twice to kind of give it an idea of where I'm going to place that hem. I'm using those creases to line up my fabric on the shaping board. This is the same board that I use for my smart bishops, and on the reverse it has all these little designs. So I'm just lining up my fabric and tracing it out, and when I get to the second piece for the skirt, I am using the first piece to line it up to know where I'm going to continue that curve. So there's actually two different kinds of lace tape that Farmhouse has. And for the first one that I'm showing here, you don't want to pull on the end because it will just literally unravel. So I just hung off like a couple inches or so on each side, and that took care of that. Now, because it's sort of just weaved together, not sewn or anything like that, it has a wonderful bias tape property to it. With all of these curves, they are gradual curves, but still with all of these curves, I didn't have to pull any of the headers. There is a pull thread on each of the headers for this lace tape stuff. But like I said, I don't have to pull any of that because the lace tape was just so bias-like. If that makes any sense, it just moved wonderfully. And here I'm showing how to do a miter corner. You just kind of fold it over on itself and then pin it in place, and I can just continue working like that. Then I brought it over to my machine and I did a very small zigzag on each side of that using 80 weight thread. When I got to the top of a miter, I would just put my needle down and turn as needed. Sometimes I would actually lift my foot up a little bit with my needle up and use a pin to hold that top of the miter in place while I put the needle back down from my sewing machine, and then I would go ahead and continue. And then I kind of rinsed and repeat to do the bottom of that curve. Then I decided that it would be kind of cool to make this into some piping. So I'm folding this in half, and the cord that I ordered, for whatever reason, I don't know what I was thinking, but it was like uber duper wide for what I needed. So I'm pulling a piece of it out and I'm just kind of pulling it down. I think I ended up using about 6 strands of this stuff, and that worked pretty well. Once I had this lace tape ironed over and the cording inside, I just put a pin there to kind of keep it in place while I took it over to my sewing machine. Now if you do this, you are going to want to put some stabilizer behind it so your machine doesn't eat this all up. And then I changed my foot to a zipper foot for this stitching and moved my needle so it was right next to where that cording is. I just stitched along. Once you're done with that, you can just gently pull it off of that stabilizer, and this should be your finished result. Now for the sleeves, I put 2 rows of gather stitches on the top as well as the bottom of that sleeve, which will look something like that. And then I took the sleeve band and ironed that in half and put this piping maybe 1/4 of an inch or so away from the raw edges. And I stitched right along those same stitches I used to make that piping. And at this point you can gather the bottom of that sleeve up to fit the sleeve band. Now you're going to go right sides together with the piping on the bottom, if that makes sense. And again, I'm just stitching right along that same stitch line that I used twice previously. And that's what it should look like. Then you can just pull out that gather thread and we can move on to the front of the bodice. This bodice on the back of it has a little bit of darts. How I like to do darts is I just put a pin at the top of the dart, and then I make 2 little snips at the bottom of the dart. I line the snips up right sides together and use that pin to kind of create a line there. You're going to go from the bottom of the dart where those slits are all the way to that pin. So midway in the dart, I'll just pull the pin out and kind of reference where that little hole is, and that's what my darts look like. Keep in mind that I backstitch on the inside of the dart, and I like to iron my darts away from the center. So at this point, I'm playing with the rest of the lace tape to figure out how to do some flowers that I want to embellish with. Alright, like I said, there's 2 different kinds of this lace tape stuff. This stuff right here is just woven together. It's not really stitched together, so you can move the threads along themselves, if that makes sense. If I'm showing here, you can move them along themselves and move them back or whatever, and it's very, very flexible because of this. It's very much like bias tape, whereas this stuff, you can see it's a little bit more heavy duty, and it is to some flavor stitched together, because no matter how much I'm trying to move these threads, they're not budging since they are some flavor stitched together. But it still does have a good bias property to them, and both kinds of these lace tapes do have a pull thread on each of the headers. Here's that pull thread that I'm talking about. I just used a pin to yank it out a little bit so I could grab a hold of it and pull on it. Now, as I'm pulling on it, I'm pinning it to this board so it doesn't just go crazy on me to try to keep some semblance of order. And I just keep pulling on that until I have a flower with the density that I like, and then I snip it off with a bunch of extra. You want to make sure to have some extra. At this point, you're going to sew your flower together wherever you want that to end. So I'm taking this sharp needle with, or millimeter, whatever you want to call her. One's just longer than the other. But I'm taking it with some 80 weight thread and making a knot at the end of it by looping it and putting it through that loop twice and pulling on that. That creates a knot. And I'm just taking very tiny little stitches, and I do this a couple times. Like, I'll do it going from the bottom up, then the top down, then the bottom up. I did, I think, 2 or 3 times on each flower, and then I tied it off in a knot using that same loop technique that I tied on with. At this point, you're going to want to pull those little lace pull things at the header out just on the inside of that knot that you used to sew this together. If you don't do this, then your flower can just come undone. So you're going to want to take those 2 lace thread pulls, if you will, and you want to tie them in a knot. That way your flower stays densely together instead of just coming undone. So you just tie that, and look at that's a little flower. Now, to secure those ends, what I did was I cleanly snipped them and then I rolled them on themselves twice. That way those raw edges are inside of that roll. And then I just hand stitched that in place. Now, I repeated this several times, and I made a inside and an outside of my flower with 2 different colors, making one larger, not, gathering it as tightly, that way it would be bigger, and the smaller one could just fit inside of the bigger one. And now I'm moving on to figure out how I want to do these stems, and so I'm just sort of playing around with it and seeing what I like, pinning it in place and going from there. Then I'm inserting this yellow ribbon to make a bow, and I'm just sort of pinning all of that in place. For the stems, I'm using very tiny little stitches, as you can see here, to sew that in place, and then the rest of it I'm just tacking. And I don't know what happened to the rest of my footage. I am very, very sorry. I did footage of all the rest of the construction, but I don't know where it went. But basically from there, I inserted a plaque onto the back of the dress. I gathered up my skirt so it fit the front and the back of the yokes, and then I stitched all that in place with French seams to join the sides. And then I hand stitched the hem in place, as well as hand stitching the placket and the sleeve band in place as well, and the inside of all that bodice work. I stitched all of that down by hand as well. Then I did hand done buttonholes for the back of this, and I have videos on all of those. I have videos on how to do all of the hand stitching, as well as the buttonholes, as well as the French seams. So go check those out. If you have any questions, just please let me know and I will do my best to answer them. And I, of course, will link below where you can buy this lace tape. As always, we appreciate y'all for watching, and we hope to catch y'all next time.